Okay. Good afternoon to everybody. Welcome in the Italian pavilion. My name is Enzo Grossi. I am the scientific advisor of the Italian Life Science Technology Cluster ALISEI, the organization that has promoted this workshop on the Mediterranean diet. I thank very much the Molisana Company, the sponsor of this initiative, represented today by Dr. Francesca Dinucci, who talk later on. I will share the moderation of this session with my colleague Marco Patriciello from Neuromed Research Institute. He will now introduce the session, and I will take over in presenting the speakers later on. Our time available is quite tight. We have overall 1 hour and a half. I recommend the speaker to stay within 15, maximum 20 minutes, and we collect at the end possible questions from the audience at the end of presentation. So now, please.
Okay, thanks Enzo, and thanks to everyone for being here today. I'm Marco Patriciello, and I represent Neuromed Institutes. Today, we are here to talk about Mediterranean diet and Molisani study. The Mediterranean has seen the creation of great civilizations, such as Assyrian, Babylonian, Greek, Egyptian, Arab, Roman. These civilizations are strongly interconnected, and thanks to them, we have skills like writing, coding, orientation in navigation, reading. But was it by chance or because of their habits? Hippocrates, in his masterpiece called Regimen, described food and diet able to preserve health. In fact, before the development of technological molecular medicine in the 50s, there were no effective remedies against the diseases. And every well-being person was linked to good nutrition and conditional life. But how? Research published in 2003 in the New England Journal of Medicine has pointed out that a diet based on vegetables, legumes, cereals, and fruit has positive effects on our heart and our cardiovascular disease, giving a physiological explanation of what was previously studied in the United States with the Framingham study on the correlation between cholesterol level and cardiovascular diseases. Other studies were carried out over the years. Other studies carried out over the years have shown a link between the diet and longevity in some population clusters in the Mediterranean. This is why Mediterranean diet became so popular as a synonym of health. Another study, published in 2019 in The Lancet, claimed that 1 of 5 deaths in the world is related to poor nutrition, characterized by a low intake of fruit, cereals, and vegetables, and high intake of sugary drinks, trans fat, processed meat. This kind of diet is a risk for our health, for our well-being, and also for our mental health. However, a population study was needed in order to understand if the positive effect on health and longevity could be linked to standard of living, to the environment, to pharmaceutical products. And in order to understand these questions, 20 years ago, Molisani study was launched. It was a population-based study done with over 20,000 individuals, all taken from Molise region. And this symposium is dedicated to research carried out in Greece, in Spain, and in Italy through Molisani study that has a double interpretation. Molisani are the inhabitants of Regione Molise, that is a small region located in south of Italy. And Molisani, broken in the middle, is related to health. Sani means healthy. Neuromed, which is a scientific institute that I'm in order to represent today, has promoted and supported this session. whose result will be presented by several speakers. Also, I would like to thank Pasta Molisana, an important player in the field of food production in Italy and one of the excellency in Molise. And also, I would like to thank Alisei, the technological cluster, who has promoted this session. Now.
Okay, many thanks, Marco, for your nice presentation, introduction of the symposium. Now the first speaker is Professor Licia Iacoviello, who is not here, unfortunately, but will have her presentation online. Professor Iacoviello directs the Department of Epidemiology and Prevention at Neuromed Institute at Pozzilli, Italy, and is full professor of hygiene and public health at University of Insubria, near Varese in Italy, North Italy. Since 2005, she is the principal investigator and coordinator of the Molisani study, one of the largest cohort study on the Mediterranean diet. The title of her presentation is The Molisani Project, Lessons from a Population-Based Study.
Iacoviello, head of the Department of Epidemiology and Prevention at Neuromed, and professor of public health at the University of Varese, Italy. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present the Molisani study as an important tool to evaluate the healthy properties of the Mediterranean diet. In Italy, Mediterranean diet refers to the diet of the farmers in southern Italy in the 50s. According to the word of Ansel Keys, that firstly introduced this concept and studied the healthy property of this diet, when we think to the Mediterranean diet, we imagine a lovely dish of beans with pasta, a lot of bread without any spread, great quantities of fresh vegetables, a modest portion of meat or fish, no more than twice a week, wine in moderation, always fresh fruits as dessert, and extra virgin olive oil. Graphically, the concept of the Mediterranean diet has been represented as a pyramid in which, at the basis, there are food that shall be consumed more frequently because healthy. And at the apex, there are foods that should be consumed less frequently because less healthy. However, diet and principally food ingredients change over time. Perhaps grain have been refined, salt content of food has been increased. Therefore, it is necessary to continuously monitor the dietary impact of food on health. With this aim, we designed the Molisani study, a large epidemiological study that transformed the small region in an open-air research laboratory. From 2005 and 2010, we recruited over 24,000 subjects from the general population of the Molise region, aged more than 34, with no upper limit of age. Molise is a small region in the upper part of south of Italy, with a good Mediterranean tradition, genetically homogeneous, and with still a low grade of immigration, so still maintaining the Mediterranean dietary habits. Subjects were visited at baseline with face-to-face interview, where personal and family history of disease were collected, but also information of health-related behaviors, dietary habits, quality of life, depression and resilience, and socioeconomic status. Each subject underwent a number of clinical measurements, like spirometry to evaluate lung function, electrocardiography to evaluate heart function, but also measure of body fat distribution and systolic and diastolic blood pressure. We also collect blood samples and urine samples in a fasting status in the morning. The blood was used from one end to evaluate a number of laboratory factors that were useful to define the cardiovascular risk of the subject, like lipids, metabolism, cholesterol, triglycerides, HDL or LDL, glucose metabolism, marker of inflammation like C-reactive protein, or marker of coagulation activation like D-dimers, and blood cell count. But blood samples were also used to set up a biobank. The Molisani Biobank is one of the largest biobanks available in Europe and store more than 1 million of samples from our Molisani subject in liquid nitrogen. That means at minus 196 degrees centigrade, a very hard cold that preserves the integrity of the proteins and other factors that are present in the blood. We collected over 36 blood samples for each subject, composed by 2 different kinds of plasma, serum, cellular pellet for DNA extraction, and after DNA extraction, DNA. In our biobank, we also stored urines to have the possibility to evaluate important biomarkers that are excreted through this way. I would like to spend a few words to explain you which kind of questionnaires we use to evaluate the dietary habits of our population. So we use an already well-standardized questionnaire that was used for the EPIC study, the first big study evaluating the relationship between dietary habits and cancer risk. What is important of this questionnaire? That he asks information on the quantity and the frequency of food consumed during the year previous the interview. But the interview is made with the help of a number of pictures of the food. That is very important to have an objective semi-quantitative quantification of the food consumption. Let's make an example. In this slide, you see a dish of pasta in different portions. If you ask perhaps to a very nice young lady, very thin, how many pasta she eats per day, she will answer a normal dish of pasta. But when you ask her to indicate what is the picture that represents the pasta she eats, she will say this one or even less. Then you can pose the same question to a big man, an hard worker, and he will say, okay, I eat a normal dish of pasta. Then we ask him to indicate which one is the picture that better represents his dish of pasta, and he will say this one or even bigger. So you need picture to really quantify the amount of pasta, in this case, of other food that people eat. But to ask about food consumption is not enough to have the possibility to quantify the addition to the Mediterranean diet of each person. So for this, we use the score that was firstly proposed by Antonia Tricopoulou in the framework of the EPIC study. So she divided the food belonging to the Mediterranean diet in 9 major groups. According to the distribution of this food consumption in the population, she attributed the score of 1 to the high consumption, that means a consumption higher of the median of the distribution in the population, of food considered healthy, like perhaps cereals or fruit and vegetables, and 0 for an intake of such food group lower than median. For food that were considered no or less healthy, like red and processed meat, the score was attributed at the contrary. So the score 1 was for an intake lower than the median, and the score 0 was for an intake higher of the median. So for alcohol consumption, the moderation was considered as the best option. Then the score 1 was attributed to a moderate consumption of alcohol, and score 0 to no consumption or to a higher consumption. So if we make a sum of these 9 scores, we obtain a combined score, a cumulative score, ranging from 0 to 9. 0 means a very low addition to the Mediterranean diet, and 9 means a very high addition to the Mediterranean diet. So we evaluated our population according to this definition of addition to the Mediterranean diet, and we had the possibility in such a way to assess if people belonging to the different categories of addition to the Mediterranean diet had a different risk of cardiovascular disease. And indeed, as you can see from this graph, people with a high adherence to the Mediterranean diet also show a reduced risk, about 23% lower than people at poor consumption or poor addition to the Mediterranean diet of cardiovascular risk. Also, if we consider not only the cardiovascular risk, but in the general mortality, so the longevity of our population, we could demonstrate that subjects adhering more to the Mediterranean diet lived longer as compared to subjects adhering less to the Mediterranean diet. This was in the general population, but we also consider people that were particularly at risk of cardiovascular disease and of death, like people with diabetes or older people, elderly. Here are shown the relationship between Mediterranean diet addition and cardiovascular and total mortality in subjects with diabetes. And we can see that an high addition to the Mediterranean diet was associated with a decrease in the risk of cardiovascular mortality and total mortality. Similarly, we were able to demonstrate that the high addition to the Mediterranean diet was associated with a decrease in the risk of total mortality in subjects older than 65 years. So we can say that it's never too late to start eating the Mediterranean diet. However, we tried also to understand which category of food was responsible for the decrease of risk attributed to the Mediterranean diet using a sort of decomposition of the Mediterranean score. And you can see from this table that in elderly patients, the food categories that were more associated, more responsible for the protective role of the Mediterranean diet were the ratio monounsaturated saturated fat, that means the consumption of extra virgin olive oil, a high consumption of fish, and a moderate consumption of alcohol, followed by a high consumption of cereals. Altogether, they are responsible for more than 50% of the protective effect of the Mediterranean diet in elderly. The same results we obtain in diabetic subjects, in particular in these categories of at risk of cardiovascular disease subjects, the moderate consumption of alcohol, the low intake of dairy products, and the high intake of cereals was responsible for the majority of the effect of the Mediterranean diet in decreasing the risk of mortality in general and of cardiovascular mortality in particular. But Mediterranean diet is not only a mean to prevent disease, but it's also a way to feel better, a matter of well-being. Indeed, we demonstrated in the Molisani study that subjects with an higher addition to the Mediterranean diet showed also a higher psychological resilience. That means a higher capacity to react to the stress. Addition to the Mediterranean diet was also associated with the quality of life. In particular, people with the highest adherence to the Mediterranean diet show a higher mental health quality of life. So we can conclude this short talk trying to convince you that Mediterranean diet is a useful tool to prevent health, saying that really Mediterranean diet is effective in reducing mortality, cardiovascular risk, and cancer risk in the general population and in high-risk population. Also, presently, although we can consider different food categories in the Mediterranean diet that can be associated, that can explain the protective effect, Mediterranean diet should be considered as a whole. And finally, Mediterranean diet is not only a list of food, is not only associated with disease, but is also associated with well-being. That means that it's not only food, but also variety, seasonality, and more conviviality and culture. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank Professor Iacoviello for her presentation, very interesting. And I would say that I am very glad to see that the wine is important in the diet. Because Professor Stuck, maybe you remember, we had the symposium on wine and health in Italian Expo 2015. And I think that we have to reevaluate all this because wine is not just alcohol, it's something in addition. Now is the turn of Dr. Maria Laura Bonaccio. Dr. Bonaccio is a senior epidemiologist from Neuromed Institute in Pozzilli, especially focusing the impact of economic crisis in the modification of adhesion to the Mediterranean diet. Also in relation to the industrial processing of foods, which can vary a lot. She has been the principal author of many publications derived from Molisani study. Indeed, there are more or less 90 publications from Molisani study so far. And the title of her presentation is the Mediterranean diet in the XXI century still effective to live longer? He is not present, but we have a registration talk.
Department of Epidemiology and Prevention at the IRCS Neuromed in Italy. Together with Maria Benedetta Donati, we will talk about new emerging issues relating to the association between Mediterranean diet and health in the 21st century. As a first step, we would like to recognize that about 10 years ago, UNESCO inscribed the Mediterranean diet on the list of the intangible heritage of humanity. In doing, granting this recognition, UNESCO recognized the Mediterranean diet not only as a list of food, but emphasized the fact that this Mediterranean diet, the concept of Mediterranean diet, encompasses a set of skills, knowledge, ritual, symbols, and tradition that pertain to several activities that bring the food to the table of people. This goes from harvesting, fishing, animal husbandry, conservation, food processing, food cooking, and the sharing and the consumption of food. For example, eating together has been acknowledged as the foundation of the cultural identity of people living in the Mediterranean countries. Also, food represents a moment of social exchange, and also markets have been recognized an important role in the dietary habits of these people, especially local markets. So, when looking at the definition provided by UNESCO, we end up with having the feeling that something is missing in the traditional way of looking at the diet of the population. Because we know that from an epidemiological point of view, we just know some aspects, we just catch some aspects of the people's diet. According to UNESCO, we should rethink our current knowledge of Mediterranean diet. And we should ask ourselves whether we are actually treating the Mediterranean diet as a grocery shopping list or as a cultural meal. A grocery shopping list is made of a list of food that people eat, like vegetables, nuts, legumes. A cultural model means that we should catch how people eat this food. We do know that the Mediterranean population eat vegetables with pasta and add olive oil, extra virgin olive oil on vegetables. And also they do not simply eat food, they eat seasonal fruits. They do not eat fish nuggets, they eat fresh fish. They use high quality extra virgin olive oil. They drink wine in moderation, not just wine. And they drink wine during their meal. When eating meat, they eat meat with vegetables, and also usually have wine while eating meat with vegetables. They are convivially. That means that they do not have their meals alone watching TV, but they share the food with people at the table. So we don't know many things when we rely on the traditional tools used to collect data on how people eat. We don't know where people buy food, if they use long supply chain, short supply chain. We don't know anything about type of production. I mean, we might have studies addressing a particular issue, but it's very, as far as we know, there is no study addressing all these issues in one specific population cohort. So maybe we have one study addressing if people buy organic food, but contextually they do not know, for example, meal patterns, or if people respect biodiversity and seasonality when they make their food choice. We don't know nothing about the preferred type of cooking, the food pairing, that is how people match food, like it's made pasta, made with vegetables, wine, while having meat with vegetables, and so on. So our question is it worth knowing all these aspects of nutrition? The answer probably is yes. This data from the Nutrinet Santé Court on 100,000 people from France indicate that organic food consumption is associated with lower risk of cancer, independently of the amount of food consumed. So, given that the amount is the same, what makes the difference in predicted cancer risk is the fact that this food is organic. And also, in preliminary results from the Molisani study, where we specifically wanted to know if people, other characteristics of food consumed by people beyond, traditional assessment of the Mediterranean diet. So we basically combine people adhering more or less to the Mediterranean diet with the fact that they prefer to buy local food or organic food. We had an idea on how people fall into these different categories, and we found that, for example, those having a high adherence to the Mediterranean diet and not having local food are the majority of those people having a Mediterranean diet and having also local food. And the same was found, for example, when matching adherence to the Mediterranean diet with the fact of preferring organic food. But the majority, the more represented category is of people who have low Mediterranean diet adherence and no local food, which represents more than 30% of the population, and more than 40% is represented by those having a low adherence to the Mediterranean diet and do not buy organic food. But does it make the difference in terms of health? We ask ourselves this and combine this categorization with a marker of, let's say, health, which is low-grade inflammation, that is a factor that predisposes to high risk of mortality and cardiovascular disease and other chronic disease. And we found that as compared with people having low Mediterranean diet adherence and not buying organic food, not consuming organic food, those who have a high Mediterranean diet adherence and choosing preferably organic food had lower levels of this low-grade inflammation. And the same was found for people when looking at people combining Mediterranean diet adherence with the choice of buying and consuming everyday local food. You see, these people have lower chance of having low-grade inflammation as compared to people not having Mediterranean diet adherence, no local or organic food. What happens today at a time of globalization of markets and food? Paradoxically, we could end up with having two types of Mediterranean diet. One traditional Mediterranean diet made of local, minimally processed food, respecting biodiversity and seasonality, and you see represented on the right of the screen. And we could have still people that are classified as Mediterranean, but their diet is totally different from Mediterranean diet people in defined as the definition of income. For example, we may have people consuming just canned legumes instead of dried legumes that are the one traditionally consumed in the Mediterranean basin. We might have people consuming sliced packaged cheese instead of this fresh cheese. We might have people consuming packaged bread instead of people consuming homemade artisanal bread. People having fish nuggets instead of fresh fish. People having tomato sauce in the can rather than fresh tomato sauce that is processed at home, as the Mediterranean diet tradition has always taught to people in the Mediterranean basin. So if we can make this distinction for each type of food traditionally included in the Mediterranean diet definition, and we want to know if people following a traditional Mediterranean diet are basically different from people following a Western type Mediterranean diet that is made of basically industrial food. And now we come to one of the most debated topics in nutritional epidemiology in the last year, that is ultra-processed food. Traditional approach usually look at food from a nutritional point of view. You know, you define food as good or bad for health on the basis of the nutritional formulation, the nutritional content. But in the last 10 years, a researcher have proposed a new way of looking at food, that is by looking at the degree of processing food undergo. So, in such a way, we categorize food on the basis of new different principles. That is, we are not looking to the nutritional components, but we are looking at the type of processing these foods underwent. Based on this new concept of treating food, we may have 4 kinds of food that are graded on the basis of the degree of processing. So we start from minimally processed food, and we up to the ultra processed food category that includes those products mostly done by industrial formulation that contain little on a whole or no whole food, are generally high energy dense products, high in sugar, unhealthy fat and salt, are low in fiber, protein, vitamins and minerals. Basically, they are nutrient poor. The proportion of food that is ultra processed in the world is on the rise globally, and it represents more than 0.5% of the total calories eaten daily in US and UK, but also in Canada. But if we look at percentage in the Mediterranean country, we see that we still have acceptable proportions of ultra-processed food. That is, latest estimation indicate 70% in Italy and 24% in Spain. But why ultra-processed food has become a major public health concern? Because there is growing evidence linking the consumption of this food to negative health outcomes. In this meta-analysis, we analyzed data from 13 prospective cohort studies, and all consistently indicated that an increase in the intake of ultra-processed food is associated with increased risk of all-cause mortality, CVD incidence, but also depression and overweight and obesity. In the Molesani study cohort, that is our cohort recruited from 2005 to 2010 in this little region of Italy, which is Mediterranean by tradition, we found that increasing the proportion of ultra-processed food in the diet leads to an increase in the risk of all-cause mortality and of dying from cardiovascular causes in a dose-dependent way. The same was true also for people who are already at high risk of premature mortality or disease, like people suffering from CVD at baseline. So we analyzed this association within those who are at high risk. And also here, in this case, we observed that people having a high proportion of UPF in the diet risk to die earlier than people who actually limit the consumption of these foods. But in light of this consideration on this peculiar feature of the Mediterranean diet, that is not only a sum of food, we ask ourselves whether all Mediterranean diets are created equal. We asked this question some years ago because we found this weird association in our cohort that basically says that the Mediterranean diet is effective in reducing the risk of dying from the risk of cardiovascular disease only if you have a higher educational level or you have a high household income. As you can see from this graph, The protection of a Mediterranean diet is present only in those with post-secondary education or those earning more than 40,000 euro per year. So we wanted to see what difference in diet these people had and divide people with low education from those with high educational level, and setting the Mediterranean diet, the same Mediterranean diet adherence. So basically these two groups have potentially the same adherence to the Mediterranean diet, but you know, they differ for a lot of other dietary indexes that are not included in the traditional assessment of the Mediterranean diet. For example, these people eat much more monounsaturated fat in their diet, eat more food that are rich, that have a high antioxidant capacity. They have more vitamin D from the diet, and they also exhibit a high dietary diversity, which is important for health. And the same was true also for when we looked at people, we separated people on the basis of their income. So our general comments from this reasoning that we share with you today is that we do agree that the Mediterranean diet is not a list of food, and also that epidemiological studies rely on questionnaires that are not able to distinguish where this food had been grown, transformed, nor which preservative or pesticides are used. Also, epidemiological data are currently unable to address whether substituting minimally processed foods typical of a traditional Mediterranean diet, for example, dried legumes or fresh vegetables, with processed food, the same food but processed, for example, canned legumes, would have different impact on long health outcomes. So nutritional epidemiology needs to be reinforced with new tools that are able to catch novel diet-related aspects. They really make the difference on long-term health. So I want to thank you for your attention. This is my group at the Neuromed Institute in Pozilli, and as you can see, we are surrounded by olive trees that make us really and traditionally Mediterranean. Thank you.
Okay. We thank Dr. Bonaccio for her very interesting presentation. It's clear that it's becoming more and more complex to study the dietary habits so far. For a future study, maybe we need to go in depth with all these specific topics. And it is also clear that Mediterranean diet is in between life science and agro-food production. Probably more agro-food production than lifestyle. And another important cluster, national cluster in Italy is agro-food cluster CLAN. And Alizei cluster has signed an agreement for cooperation. We are cooperating very much, and I'm glad to see here the scientific advisor of CLAN cluster, Professor Patrizia Brigidi. Hello. Okay, now I have the pleasure to invite Professor Ramon Estruc to the table. Professor Estruc is professor at the Faculty of Medicine at University of Barcelona and has many academic attributions. It's very difficult to follow all your attributions. I don't have time to list everything. For example, he is a director of a nutrition, cardiovascular disease and aging group in Biomedical Research Institute EDBABS in Barcelona. He is a scientific director of the Mediterranean Diet Foundation, Barcelona. And he has been the director of a Predimed study, a very famous trial. He will speak later on and you will understand very well, on the effect of Mediterranean diet on the cardiovascular disease. So I give the floor to you, and please.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for being here in so fantastic expo. So we're talking about the intervention studies on Mediterranean diet on health, because the intervention studies allow us to give the highest level of scientific evidence in our conclusions. I want to always to start with this fantastic paper published in Circulation in 2018 by the group of Harvard that really detect 5 healthy lifestyle factors like no smoking, a low body mass index, to follow a healthy diet, to practice exercise, and also to drink moderate alcohol consumption. But the problem is, what could be the best healthy diet pattern that we can recommend or we should recommend to our patients or our friends? So we know that really the diet is the highest cause of disease in the world, so we realize that this is very, very important. And I am a medical doctor. I am really sad that in my medical career, nobody talk about dietary habits. You have a lot of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and so on, but no real training on food and dietary habits. Maybe in endocrinology, maybe some notions, but not really. So we have to start to study medicine by the basis, and diet and lifestyle should be the basis of the health, and so should be the basis of the medical career. In this sense, we know that there are some triggering factors that have a higher impact in our health. There is the number of dietary calories. Another is refined carbohydrates and added sugars, saturated fat, salt, and also a physical activity and sedentary behaviors. Depending on these factors, we can get a better or worse health. But we know that we have to include these factors in a diet, so the effects of a food is limited, and we know that is the synergism between foods, so we think that the best exposure of our body is a diet, not only a food or a nutrients, so we have to consider the overall diet in evaluation our patients or our participants in the studies. And this is a list of healthy dietary patterns like Mediterranean diet, Nordic diet, Dutch diet, flexitarian diet, or vegetarian diet. And what could be the best? This is the chance nowadays. We believe really that we have to evaluate what is the best dietary pattern we can recommend to our patients or participants according to a randomized clinical trials. And we know that cardiovascular disease is still the main cause of death in the 21st century. We have to fight against myocardial infarction, stroke, and another cardiovascular features. In this sense, we also know that the best weapons to fight against cardiovascular disease, cancer, and several neurological disease is diet and exercise, is lifestyle. The problem is we've had is what could be the best diet we can recommend to our patients. According to different rankings, this is the best ranking of the US News. Mediterranean diet was in the first position, Dutch diet was in the second, and vegetarian diet was in that. But we have to put the ranking according to scientific evidence. And one scientific evidence is systematic reviews or meta-analysis. This is an old systematic reviews that rank Mediterranean diet in the first position in the ranking in the relationship between dietary factors and coronary heart disease. So we are knowing a lot of evidences that Mediterranean diet could be the best diet we have recommend to other diseases. This is the pyramid of the Mediterranean diet. All of us know about this, but we want to focus that the problem is the quality of the studies we are evaluating. And most of the studies performed is a cohort studies that is in the middle of this pyramid between low and high quality of evidence. Cohort studies help us to get a lot of recommendations, but we have to be aware that this is in the middle of the place. So we have to go to randomized clinical trials in order to be sure that what we are recommending to our patients or friends or families is the best we can recommend. And in this sense, we believe that we have to base our recommendations in intervention studies, in this case talking on the effects of Mediterranean diet on cardiovascular disease. This is a very interesting paper published 2 years ago in Obesity, and was a study evaluating the Mediterranean versus Western diet in monkeys. So in monkeys it's easy to monitor all the items that could be important. In humans is more difficult. This is because the cohort studies is not in the first position in the rank of the quality of the studies. And in this study, they evaluate what is Mediterranean diet versus Western diet. And you can see in these slides, I go fast because we have no more time, that body mass index increased with Western diet, but was maintained after more than 2 years in these monkeys. And it was changes in the percentage of body fat, and also was a change but was not a big change in total calories or the calories per kilogram. So it's not a problem of the number of calories in the changes in body mass index. It's a problem of the quality of the calories. So it's not the same quality of you are using a Western diet or you are eating a Mediterranean diet. So it's not a problem of the number of calories, a problem with the quality of these calories. This is also some changes in insulin through research, hepatosteatosis. So in animals, in a long-term trials, randomized trials, Mediterranean diet is better than the Western diet. There are only 2 randomized clinical trials that has performed in humans. One is the Lion Diet Health Study. It's an old study, but very, very good results from this French study, comparing Mediterranean diet supplemented with margarine enriched with alpha-linolenic acids versus a low-fat diet that was recommended by the American Association of Cardiology. And they saw that really the number of cardiovascular events after 5 years was a lot higher in the control group compared to this Mediterranean diet group. So it was the first evidence with the highest level of scientific evidence that Mediterranean diet really works against cardiovascular disease in secondary prevention, because these people have had a myocardial infarction. In the PRETIMED, we want to study what could be the effects of Mediterranean diet on primary prevention of cardiovascular disease. I underline primary prevention because the participants was healthy in common markets, and we wanted to evaluate, to test a Mediterranean diet enriched with extra virgin olive oil or a Mediterranean diet enriched with supplementary nuts could be on the risk of cardiovascular disease, but really hard endpoints like cardiovascular death, myocardial infarction, and stroke. We wanted to evaluate the Mediterranean diet as an overall pattern, and we donate extra virgin olive oil or nuts in order to maintain the participants in the trial, because it was a long trial, was a 5-year planned trial, so we want to donate some things. The problem we have now is we have to conclude that maybe Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil, Mediterranean diet plus nuts has the healthy effects and not of the Mediterranean diet. But our intention was to demonstrate the Mediterranean diet as a whole has these protective effects. And we include participants with high risk for cardiovascular disease, because it's impossible to maintain people 20 years in a trial. And we divided these high risk subjects in 3 groups. So it's randomized clinical trial. One has to follow Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil. Another group has to follow Mediterranean diet plus nuts. And the problem of the control group is what could you recommend to the control group? Because all of us thought that the Mediterranean diet was the best, but we cannot recommend the Mediterranean diet. So we use what recommend the American Heart Association when we planned this study, and the American Heart Association it was in 2002, recommend a low-fat diet. So no olive oil, no nuts, but also plenty of vegetables, fish, etc. And all were free of cardiovascular disease at baseline. And I've skipped these slides. And one thing we want to do is to assess the compliance of the intervention. And we saw that we use a 40-point score of adherence to Mediterranean diet. And you can see that the control diet that has to decrease this 14 score, because we recommend not to use olive oil or not to use nuts, but it's very difficult in Spain, like in other Mediterranean countries, to say not eat olive oil. So in the control group, maintain more or less the baseline of this 14-point score, but it was an increase in the both Mediterranean diet groups, in the group of extra virgin olive oil and nuts. And was no a big change between the both groups. But you can see that in a long-term trials, a little changes has a very big impact on health, as you can see here. And we also measure some objective measurements of the intervention. We measure urinary hydroxytyrosol concentration that increase in the group of olive oil, and also you also measure the alpha-linolenic acid in the group of nuts that increase. And we look for really hard endpoints like cardiovascular death, myocardial infarction, and stroke. But before this, we also analyze some important risk factors like diabetes, and we demonstrate that a 40% reduction in the incidence of new cases of diabetics after 5 years without a significant changes or big changes on weight loss. So one of the important conclusion of our study was Mediterranean diet, especially if supplemented with virgin olive oil, protect against one epidemics of nowadays is diabetes. We also were worried on weight and waste, and we saw that people maintain was a slight decrease in the body weight, especially in the group of Mediterranean diet plus EVO, and was also more or less no changes in the waist perimeter. So we can say that you have not to be afraid of an increase in body weight if you recommend a high-fat diet like Mediterranean diet. If you follow Mediterranean diet, you can maintain your body weight or lose a little, and also to maintain the waist perimeter. But the most important thing was what happened with the primary heart endpoints like cardiovascular death, myocardial infarction, and stroke. And we saw that after 5 years was a 30% reduction in the incidence of cardiovascular disease events in the both groups of Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil and nuts versus a healthy diet like this, a low-fat diet. So we have demonstrated that diet has really a very big impact on cardiovascular disease if you follow a traditional Mediterranean diet. When we analyzed stroke, the figures was even better because was a 50% decrease in the incidence of stroke, especially in the group of Mediterranean diet plus nuts. And when we analyzed what happened with mortality, this was not a primary endpoint of the trial. We saw that was a decrease in the group of olive oil compared to the low-fat diet, to the control diet, but the significance was a tendency was not significant after 5 years in mortality. But when we would put together the group of Mediterranean diet plus EVO and the group of Mediterranean diet plus nuts, And we analyze per protocol, so the people who really follow the recommendations given by the dietitians was a 60% reduction in the cardiovascular incidence of cardiovascular events. So the power of the diet, if the people, the participants of the patients follow our recommendations, it may be bigger than statins and so many drugs. So we have a powerful tool that we have to maintain in order to protect our I'm sorry, but so I will go further on this. And what could be the mechanisms? We have made studies and we like that. One is an antioxidative effect of Mediterranean diet, but more an anti-inflammatory effect. Has also an effect on glucose metabolism, has changes in lipids, so increasing HDL cholesterol and decreasing LDL cholesterol, has an effect on thrombosis, and also has in vascular function, the vascular integrity. We have made a lot of biomarkers of oxidative stress and inflammatory biomarkers, and so really a decrease. This is another slide, and also a change of chemokines that always, and also in the cytokines. And also, this is important, has an effect in the vulnerability of the atheroma plaque. So one of the effects of the Mediterranean diet is to stabilize the atheroma plaque. And this effect is very, very, very early. So after few months of intervention, 3 months, you can have a change. It's not change in cardiovascular events, but you can see changes in marker-related vulnerability of atheroma plaque. Another important effect is in arrhythmia that we have. And this is the mechanisms, and you have time to decrease. That has the antioxidants, flavonoids, phenolic compounds, MUFA, PUFA, omega-3s, etc. PUFA has different effects in different pathways that are related with oxidation and inflammation. So the conclusion is that we have demonstrated with a higher level of scientific evidence that really Mediterranean diet supplemented with stability in olive oil and nuts reduced the incidence of major cardiovascular events. And this is important to also to add that is not led to weight gain and may help to lose weight and reduce weight circumference if you follow Mediterranean diet, especially in the Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil. Is very useful to reduce the diabetes risk, and also is associated with a lower clinical blood pressure. And this is the later slide. But so if you want to move to an even healthier Mediterranean diet, we should use extra virgin olive oil in our dishes. We should increase the intake of nuts, but without salt and fatty fish. We should substitute refined cereals by whole grain cereals in order to increase dietetic fiber. We should decrease the salt intake. If you use extra virgin olive oil because it's very tasteful, you reduce the salt. This is important. We recommend, according to our conclusions, that we have to maintain a moderate intake of wine always with meals. It's important to reduce but not avoid the red meat and processed meats. As also we recommend to avoid the consumption of soda drinks, commercial bakery, sweets and pastries. If you follow this, you will be longer and will be happier. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Professor Stuck, for your brilliant and fantastic presentation. Now we have our sponsor that is giving us some clues about the problem of the quality of the food. Because pasta means everything, but what kind of pasta? So Dr. Francesca Dinucci, the marketing manager of Molisana, will report now a success story in regard of a company producing pasta. So we will learn some very interesting thing for this. Audio?
I represent La Molisana as brand marketing manager. First of all, thank you for having us as one of the contributors to talk about properties and principles of the Mediterranean diet. since we are a pasta producer and pasta is in fact at the base of the food pyramid and plays a key role in the Mediterranean diet as high nutritional value food, easily to digest, capable of filling up, versatility that can be combined in a multitude of ways, sustainable since it is perfectly suitable to prepare one dish meal and to provide our body with all relevant nutrients needed for a balanced meal on a daily basis. In this regards, we feel the responsibility as a food company and specifically as pasta producer to advocate healthy food habits by promoting in schools and in communities within the company the Mediterranean diet principle. In the past years, we made agreement with the University of Molise Food and Nutrition Program to create recipe books dedicated to parents and to chefs based on the Mediterranean diet and the one-dish meal. And moreover, we welcomed incoming visitors into the factory to catch their own first-hand experiences on what is behind the production of pasta in order to contribute in widespreading the culture of quality and empower consumers' knowledges to recognize and choose products made by best ingredients through safe production processes and top technology, thus respecting high quality standards and high safety standards. Who is La Molisana? La Molisana is a family business company based in Molise. In 2011, La Molisana has been acquired by the Ferro Group, a family of millers since 1910 who completed the entire supply chain from the grain to the pasta and completely revived the brand with a total restyling of production, service, venues, and philosophy. We work on 3 sites, silos, mill, and pasta factory, and we have over 204 employees. Within the Durum with Semolina pasta market, we represent the 4th player, while in the segment of Durum whole with Semolina pasta, we are the 2nd player. We actually export our pasta in over 120 countries, where the best performing countries are Canada, US, Brazil, Japan, Russia, Australia, and so going on. Which is the place where we work in, which is Molise. Our land and its exclusive ingredients between tradition and innovation. Yes, because our pasta factory is located at 730 meters above sea level and is one of the highest located in the south center of Italy and operates in the heart of Molise. This is a place with a strong cereal growing vocation, which is rich of spring water and uncontaminated air, thus offering the ideal conditions for pasta production. Here you find some of the prizes that we collecting during these 11 years. We do not usually like to show our prizes, but it represents a seal of approval attested by our national and local stakeholders to our activity. Which are the leverages that we use to achieve the success and to become a quality premium pasta? We used 4 leverages: the family, the control over entire supply chain, the innovation and sustainability. When we talk about family, we talk about history. This is a family of millers since 4 generations, since 1910. So behind our pasta, there is the story of a family that has been selecting and milling only the finest durum wheat, who handed down solid skills and an indomitable spirit and the serious governance. All this represent our added value. Integrated supply chain. This is an asset that belongs only to the 10% of the food company in Italy, and in a segment of pasta player in the domestic market, we are only 4, and we are one of them. What does mean? That means that we have the control over the entire life cycle of pasta through any step production process that allows us to assure high food safety standards, to increase our competitive performance, and to promote local and social economic growth in our territory. We work on silos, in a mill, and in a pasta factory. The third leverage is represented by the innovation. Innovation for us is a status of mind. Whether we have to develop a product or to improve a process or to make wider our range in any case or to buy a new technology, we consider innovation a really great driver of our company. La Molisana developed an investment strategy of about 80 million euro in 11 years to grow in efficiency and quality. Every leading department of the company has been empowered by introducing advanced technologies to increase productivity, upgrading competitiveness, and improving also our sustainability performances. Today, La Molisana belongs to the most modern and advanced technologies in Italy. For example, we have in the mill the optical sorter and the stone debrenners. This last one can be considered our signature. It is actually modern technology which employs an ancient method that gently purifies the grains, preserving their original properties. Also, in terms of innovation, we go forth in the pasta factory where we invested in 2 heat and cooling plants and many new top-notch technology in the pasta line. Always in terms of innovation, we bought new automatic warehouses that are able to guarantee a high food safety standards, to increase integrity of the finished product, to increase the efficiency in handling, picking, loading, and so going on. Moreover, we use only the thermopest, which is a pest control treatment, only with high temperature and without any kind of gas and fumigants. The fourth leverage of our company is our sustainability engagement. Since the beginning, sustainability has been a driving force that helps us to face challenges, to forge a new model of development. Every day we seek solutions to reduce environmental impact and meet requirements of customers and local communities in which we operate, with a commitment to guaranteeing high safety standards for employees and consumers alike. A clear, defined, and long-term strategic vision and a day-by-day action based on a synthesis between innovation and sustainability, driven through 3 directions. Food sustainability, promotion of sustainable agriculture, traceability along the integrated supply chain, collaboration with farmers to create high quality and high quality grain protection, and search for innovative products for new food needs, social sustainability, promotion of talent, care of our employees, promotion of social and economic development of the territory, promotion of food education, environmental sustainability, energy efficiency initiatives, 100% recyclable packaging, management and reduction of greenhouse gas emission, and promoting circular economy. Only in 2001 we produced these 3 results. First of all, La Molisana is making strides in reducing plastic production by about 330 tons plastic kilo per year, and thanks a new FSC certified paper bag that represents a first and foremost ethic-oriented choice, and as we are determined to critical drive environmental impact on our packaging solution as well. The second step was the zero impact by LifeGauge. La Molisana participates in LifeGauge's Zero Impact project. CO2 emissions produced by primary and secondary packaging and paper goods have been calculated, reduced, and offset through the purchase of carbon credits generated by the creation and protection of growing forests in Madagascar, Brazil, and Italy. And at first step, in 2001, we decided to report our efforts into sustainability report to provide a transparent communication about our sustainability management and explain the values, the strategies, and performance. The report focuses on the major social and environmental issues, highlights our achievements in this area, and set goals for the future. The report is a result of the top management engaging in defining future goals related to environment, people, product, and community. This all our efforts to make our contribution to improve and empower consumers' knowledges and acquaintances in choosing a quality product, and in contribution in divulging the Mediterranean diet principle. I thank you so much for your attention, and best regards by La Molisana.
Great. Thank you, Francesca Dinucci, for the great presentation. I'm always glad when I see success story like Molisana, especially when they are in our small region. So now, last but not the least, so I'm going to leave the floor to Professor Triciopoulou, and who is the first author of the work I mentioned in my presentation. She has a great number of honors and awards. She received the Golden Cross honor by the President of the Greek Republic for the work on nutrition and public health, and award from the Federation of European Nutrition Society for her outstanding nutrition career. Also, she was the first, I guess, in the world to start to be focused on the Mediterranean diet. And so this is why there is more motivation about everyone to talk about it.
Thank you very much for your kind word, and congratulations for organizing this meeting. I was impressed by the previous presentation, and also they reminded me what was said in 500 before Christ by a Greek philosopher, Disentangling, that the right educations require, the beginning of the right education is the understanding of the words. And I have to clarify what, at least in my presentation, is meant by the term Mediterranean diet. Because Dr. Iacovello very nicely described the various approaches. And I want to tell you that today, after the success of the Mediterranean, the international success of the, and approval of the Mediterranean diet, it is more than often misused, either intentionally or unintentionally. And sometimes it was misused by purpose. So in my today presentation, I will talk about the Mediterranean diet, which is meant the traditional Mediterranean diet. And this is important because Mediterranean diet is the diet which was prevailing in the olive tree growing areas of the Mediterranean basin before the 60s. And why the olive tree grown areas? Because Mediterranean diet without olive oil does not exist. And I'm talking about olive oil, not the various type of olive oil. And why before the 60s? Because after the 60s, the socioeconomic changes were so big, and all of you have experienced them. So today, in Molisano, in very, very important papers which were presented, we are talking about which kind of food, which kind of fruits, the way we were preparing the food, we were cultivating, the link with agro-industry and so on. Before the 60s, we know how everything was produced. at least in the Mediterranean region, is registered. We know what was meant by the traditional foods. This, at least in this presentation, and when we're talking about transferability of the Mediterranean diet, I'm going to use this term. And of course, it was very nicely mentioned before that Mediterranean diet is a way of living. It's not only calories and nutrients. And that's why you see we have the wine in moderation, by the others during the meals. And having said that, it was also very nicely, and thank you, Dr. Iacovello, she mentioned about the score. The score is based, the score which she mentioned in order to assess the adherence to Mediterranean diet. This 9-point score is based on these 9 characteristics of the Mediterranean diet, which is a high consumption of fruit, high consumption of cereals, of vegetables, moderate consumption of dairy products. And this is very important when we're talking about transferability, mostly as cheese and yogurt, but moderate consumption. Moderate to high consumption of fish. And then also Dr. Struch mentioned that we do not say no to any food in the Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet is accept everything. It's a question of how much and how often. It's a question of quantity and not to say no to that. So in this context, very nicely, by Dr. Struch, it was mentioned that meat is allowed maybe once per month, the red meat, I mean. And having said that, there are, as I mentioned before, a lot of myths and misconceptions in line with the traditional Mediterranean diet as I described it before. And very briefly, I will mention some of them because, for example, in the United States, more than often you hear in the recommendation, sprinkle with olive oil. What do you mean sprinkle with olive oil? We're immersed in olive oil. So, and then if you want to talk, and I totally respect that in some countries, some people, they don't like the taste of olive oil. And then they change to seed oils. But then we are not speaking about traditional Mediterranean diet. We are talking about modified Mediterranean diet, and this is acceptable. Margarine is not Mediterranean diet. The various dressing is not Mediterranean diet if they are not based on olive oil, like vinegar and olive oil and thyme, for example. Vegetables, well, in many countries they call potatoes as vegetables. Potato is not vegetable, and the other roots. We are talking vegetables of many colors and a big variety. And the fruits, and when we're talking about fruits, we're not talking the Mediterranean dietary tradition about fruit products with added sugar, canned fruit. And then whole grain bread, and bread is something which is, I think that it's worthwhile to be studied, and more specifically, how is prepared the bread. The yeast which is used, the way bread is prepared, because bread is an essential food in the Mediterranean diet. So we are talking about the white, we're not talking when we're saying bread in the Mediterranean for the white refined flour. It's non-refined flour. The legumes, we don't talk about the canned legumes because more than often they have high salt content. We're talking about beans, lentils, peas, cooked in olive oil and with tomatoes and all the other Mediterranean way of cooking. So we could go for forever mentioning the various discrepancies of what is believed more than often in some other countries, and which is mentioned as Mediterranean diet. But I will stop to something which is very, very much needed, and it's very important. If you want to follow the Mediterranean diet in a non-Mediterranean country, and you want to follow the traditional Mediterranean diet focused in olive oil, then you have to learn a little bit, some main elements of how to cook the Mediterranean way of cooking. Otherwise, you cannot use a lot of olive oil. Keep in mind that at least in Greece, in the traditional Greek Mediterranean diet of the 60s, the energy intake from lipids, it was at the level of 35 to 40% of our energy. And most of that was due to olive oil. So because we cook everything with olive oil. And then in this context, it's very important to study the traditional foods. Because even more than ever, for years I am repeating that put emphasis on the way we were preparing traditional foods. Today and the next year is coming up because we are talking about sustainability. And sustainability is very closely related to the traditional food, not only the way they were produced in the kitchen, but the way in which they were produced in the farms. In Greek, and of course in Spain and in Italy, they have similar recipes. We cook a whole series of recipes, ladera. Ladera comes from the word lavi. Lavi in Greek means oil. So there is hundreds of recipes based on olive oil, and we call them ladera. That means eggplants, okra, beans, the various pitas is ladera. And basically, they described this ladera, vegetables cooked in plenty of olive oil, but the secret of the Mediterranean diet, and I'm very pleased that my friends from Spain, with Tori Bear activity, they focus on that. Because as in Spain, how is called your sauce is sofrito, and like cigariston, and I don't know the equivalent in Italian. I know that in Apulia, in Calabria, they are using a lot this recipe. We fry very, very lightly with garlic, onion, tomatoes, herbs, thyme, basilicum, and then this is the basic sauce in which we immerse with olive oil the various vegetables. And this is a cocktail of vitamins and micronutrients. So this is something which has to be taken under consideration if they want really to adapt or to the Mediterranean diet to be transferred in Northern or Central European countries or everywhere in the world. For example, here you see some peas cooked with olive oil and tomatoes, and which is a portion. If you take this kind of food, you do not need, believe me, we have done chemical analysis, any supplement. They contain everything. And here also you can see another recipe, very eggplant salad, and which is not, when we say salad, we mean onions, garlic, parsley, vinegar, and the total antioxidant capacity of this simple recipe is very high. So this is something which easily could be adapted, and this is transferable, but they have to be taught. And now I will tell you something else, because, and I close in a few minutes because I know that I have only 10, 15 minutes. Several years ago, we took profit of the big cohort of the EPIC study, and then we studied on more than 74,000 elderly men and women aged 60 years or older. The adherence, the survival, the relative for all, the survival of this elder according to the adherence to the Mediterranean diet. And we found out that but in this case, we didn't use the traditional Mediterranean score. We used the modified Mediterranean score. That means that instead of asking how much olive oil you consume, we were asking how much unsaturated fatty acid you consume. Unsaturated fatty acid you consume. And again, although this was a modified Mediterranean score, although this person, they were Central and Northern European, the one which they have high adherence to this modified traditional Mediterranean diet, again, they have a decreased relative risk from all-cause mortality. What that means? That means that research on Mediterranean type diets, I mean, when we're transferring the Mediterranean diet to another population, we need to make some research in order to see how it is adapted. And beyond that, I want to tell you that nowadays it's more difficult to transfer the Mediterranean diet because in the future we are going, every food they have to have the miles per food. Mediterranean diet means produce locally and consume locally, according to sustainability. And that means that Mediterranean diet could be transferred to other countries as principle, as ideas, but they have to look at local, more specifically, fruits and vegetables, like berries, for example, in the north, or kales in the Scandinavian countries, in order to get the main elements of the Mediterranean diet, but to adapt to the local production in every country. It was again mentioned before, and we have published some paper on that, and we assess the individual contribution to this beneficial effect of the Mediterranean diet, and we compare this contribution to the beneficial effect with the total dietary pattern. Indeed, the dietary pattern provides much more information. It statistically has much more power than in the individual foods. We do not know how the various elements of the various components of the Mediterranean diet, they interact in a beneficial way. And this is something which I hope in the future, more specifically by the metabolic studies, it's going to be disentangled and find the mechanism of the beneficial effects of the Mediterranean diet. So, another and last recommendation for our friends in other countries is to go to the farmers market. Through that, they can follow the main elements of the Mediterranean diet by buying fruits and vegetables. And on the other hand, they are supporting biodiversity because usually in the local market, local foods they are produced. They have 0 miles in their production. They don't travel a lot. And again, it was I mentioned before that it's besides being a healthy diet, it fosters conviviality and encourages local and seasonal consumption of products that are produced via efficient and environmentally friendly systems. And having said that, I think that nowadays, in the future 10 years, we are going to discuss more and more the relation of sustainability of the Mediterranean diet. And kindly, I remind you that only 10 days ago, the editors-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, the British Journal of Nutrition, the Lancet, and several other editors of several other prestigious journals, they published an editorial in which they recommend to be reprinted and republished anywhere as it is or modified, urging people to take under account the climatic crisis and the sustainability. So I think that there is a lot of work ahead of us, and for our colleagues or friends in other countries which they want to adapt some elements of the Mediterranean diet. Thank you.
Many thanks, Professor Trichopoulou, dear Antonia. Well, if Ansel Keys has been the father of the Mediterranean diet, actually you are really the mother.
That's true, because I can tell you that my persistence of the Mediterranean diet started when I was a young medical doctor in the hospital, when everybody was recommended seed oils. It was terrible, huge campaign after Ansel Keys. A lot of action was taken in the Northern European country, and correctly, they changed from the lard and the butter to margarine and to seed oils. It was very good for them. But this was taken in Greece because many seminars in cardiologists they were performed. Because Ansel Keys never said, he considered olive oil as neutral. He never said that olive oil was beneficial to a very important component. He said that is neutral. It's the most important. He said he was claiming that Mediterranean diet was reducing cardiovascular disease risk because of the low saturated content of this diet, which was promoting low cholesterol. But he never spoke about the value of olive oil. It was natural in the key equation. If you look in the 60s, the first publication, olive oil in the diet analysis was neutral. So nevertheless, they did correctly. And then when at that time they started in Greece cutting the olive trees, and they succeeded in that in Israel and in Palestine. They cut all, and in Cyprus. They cut the olive trees in the 60s, 70s, because they were saying that, not olive oil. So it was at that time, I was a young medical doctor and was so upset. So I was working in biochemistry in the hospitals, and then I started my relation with Mediterranean diet. That's my story.
Okay, thank you very much again. We have very little time for questions, I think, because the time has went. But if there is one question, we can take. If not, I want to express my gratitude, first of all, to Italian Pavilion for the hospitality, and in particular to our commissioner, Paolo Glisenti, who was sitting there, then was sitting there, then disappeared, but he always in around. And also Dr. Bernardo Tarantino, and also my friend Bruno for the organization. Thanks. Other two people very, very important are Professoressa Benedetta Donati and Professor Giovanni De Gaetano from Neuromed Institute, because I planned this program with their help, and so I think that this has been a great workshop on Mediterranean diet, which is clearly the best diet in the world, healthy diet, with over 6,000 publications, 6,000 on PubMed. Just to make a comparison, the Nordic diet has 600 publications, and the Okinawa diet less than 100. So the scientific platform is huge. So maybe we can reconvene in the next expo to see what's going on the Mediterranean diet, because it is always a continuing story, because it's the complexity of also economy, the transferability, and so there will be always something very interesting. Thank you very much also to my colleague Marco Patriciello, and see you very soon. Okay? Bye-bye.